Welcome back to More Than PG's Gaming, and today I want to talk about a interesting concept that always seems to get overlooked whenever anybody's talking about card games, and how there is a card that interacts with the game that would definitely help out a lot of other games, and for whatever reason has not been implemented in a bunch of card games. And you might be thinking, well, maybe this is some old forgotten relic. Maybe it was from an old card game. Maybe you're thinking, oh yeah, it's from Magic. Or maybe it's from Pokemon. Well, if it's not those, it's definitely got to be Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Yu-Gi-Oh's got all those crazy effects. Well, I'm going to say no. It's not from any of those three. Next, you might be asking, well, it's probably for that crazy thing that's on your logo. Good old Y. Schwartz. Well, I'm going to tell you also, no, it's not from Y. Schwartz. The card I'm thinking about is also not from the more recent card game that has taken my interest, which is Final Fantasy. It's not from any of these games. So what could possibly be a card that would get my attention, that would bring out something that I always thought was needed for a card game? Well, it was a very popular card when it was created, though the game suffered from a major problem with power creep, as well as, the entire fan base basically died off. Not necessarily literally died off. I mean, interest in the game died off because it was for an anime card game. Now, this is one that a lot of people have probably overlooked. It only had 6 sets. You know which one I'm talking about if you are familiar with card games. It is the good old card game of Yu Yu Hakusho. And the card in question that I'm going to bring up is a card called Solitaire. Alright. Well, Solitaire is a great card, and you will notice right away that you might not even know what it was. Okay? So first of all, what is this card? Why is it important? And is it relevant? And the answer I give to you is yes, it is incredibly relevant. Okay? First of all, you should be aware of what this card is in the context of Yu Yu Hakusho. For their trading card game, they had a variety of cards. You started with, I believe it was 4 fighters, which were automatically set off to the side. And then you basically built your deck out of additional characters or fighters, your techniques, your items, and your event cards. Now, event cards were very special. They usually only could be played during your turn, with a few exceptions. So in this case, I want to bring up the card here, Solitaire. Solitaire is an event card. Okay? And it says here, if you read it with me, play after your opponent plays a card. If your opponent has played at least 4 cards already this turn, discard a card from your hand to end your opponent's turn. I will also note that you will see the 0 next to the weird-looking spirit energy thing there. That means that it costs no energy to use. So you can even use it on your opponent's very first turn. Now, why is this important? Why is this such an important card? Well, this basically was an anti-first turn kill deck card. It was immensely useful. However, the biggest problem with this card is the rarity of the card, which was considered a ghost rare. It's about the equivalent of, if you play Magic, about a mythic. Okay? If you're not familiar with Magic, it's the highest rarity in the game. It's fairly rare. And if I remember correctly, they only come foil. So that's the important thing. And the reason why they're called ghosts was because originally when the set came out, the very first set is they were not on the card list, so they were known as the Ghost Rare because whatever, they wanted to surprise people, which was very confusing for a lot of players. They didn't know how many cards were in the set. It was really confusing, but that's not the point. This is from the 6th set. By then, people had already encountered the abuses. So why was this card created for this card game? You could say, well, there's not that much abuse, right? Well, there was a card. The very famous card, in fact. And I will tell you that I, for one, have encountered this card in tournament play. If I remember correctly, I first ran into this card after a mega tournament. I looked at it and I was like, well, this card is not that great, but it's crazy. And that card in question is called Lost. So Lost is an event card. It costs 2 energy to play. It was a tournament pack card. So you could only get the packs from tournaments, much like those that you see sometimes in Yu-Gi-Oh! But this card specifically says choose a player. That player discards the cards in his hand to draw that many cards. Mind you, this is before they tried to say his, her, or anything like that, but let's go on. Okay? You might be thinking, well, that's not that big of a deal. Well, there's cards in the game to make it so that your opponent draws cards. Well, you might not necessarily think that's a good thing, but if it's your first turn and your opponent starts with, let's say, 5 cards or even 7 cards or anything like that, and you make their hand, 12 cards, 15 cards, 20 cards, and then you play this, it's pretty much over. You play this card multiple times and you make your opponent discard their hand and draw that many. And like many other card games, if you go to draw and there are no cards left in your deck, you lose. So that's why this was created. Now, of course, there were other ways to stop Lost, and there are ways to stop Solitaire. So one of the big things that was used was a card called Halt. Halt was printed in the very first set. Seemed pretty logical. Play when your opponent plays an event, discard a card from your hand, to keep your opponent from using any effects of that event card or event he just played. Mind you, there was also a reprinting of this card in the Tournament Pack 2, but it was considered, well, a ghost rare in those tournament packs. So it's also the highest rarity in both cases. It's a ghost rare in the first set and a ghost rare in the tournament pack. So it was a worthwhile card to go after. Of course, it cost 1 energy to play, so if you were going second, generally you wouldn't be able to play this card, which made it incredibly difficult to actually play it at all. And that's partially why Solitaire was created, because they saw the emergence of the first turn decks and no way to respond to it, and this was their way to respond to it. However, the problem with Solitaire is that it's an event card. So, if you are going second, your opponent could always play Halt on your Solitaire. So, but they had to leave enough resources open so they could actually do so. Another response was a card called No. This one had a higher cost of 3. It's another event card. Again, another ghost rare. Means highest rarity. And again, this is from the final set that they made. In this case, it says play this card when your opponent plays an event, item, or technique, so it's got a little wider variety. Discard a card from your hand to keep your opponent from using any effect of that card, and then discard that card. A lot easier to pinpoint other threats, but higher cost. Okay, now let's go back to the original card, because I know sometimes it gets lost. Is that Solitaire here was the direct result of trying to get around Lost. Now, why is this important? Why is this important in this day and age? Well, there's a lot of games, in particular, a lot of mainstream games, where you could be literally sitting there playing against your opponent, and you see them play multiple cards on their first turn without you ever having a turn. And you might very well just lose on that very first turn without ever getting to do anything. We like to call that the Solitaire play, which famously is why this card is named it, is literally playing by yourself. But the other concept behind that is that this was a direct response in warning of first turn player decks. And I'm assuming that the company that made the card game, Score Entertainment, had thought about that. They were hoping that maybe this concept of this card might rub off on other card games. Why wasn't it? Maybe because there was too much money to be had to see how quickly and efficiently you could one turn kill your opponent in those card games. And I don't know. In retrospect, this card is something that players have to now prepare for. So instead of putting all of their resources into all of their combo pieces, they need to make sure they also have resources and cards to stop you from playing Solitaire, the one response that the player might have if they have anything going for them. Mind you, this is also a problem for any type of deck that does not follow the first turn kill rules, because then you have two first turn kill decks both running multiple copies of Solitaire to try to stop their opponents. This seems to be a major oversight with the company, but at the same time, I believe that they were trying to put out fires when they didn't mean to. And I remember talking to a playtester for the Yu Hakusho card game where they were introduced to an entire set, and they were asked, well, try to figure out how many first turn win cards or strategies that you can get out of their fifth set, which was, if I remember correctly, Betrayal. I believe that's what the fifth set was. And they came back to the company and said, well, we found quite a few. In fact, we found at least 5. And rather than trying to fix it, trying to balance it, or anything like that, they just left the stuff in there. And then once the 6th set came out, I believe that they knew that the game was winding down. They knew what was going on. And they knew that, this was the best time to introduce a card like this, but at the same time, it was too little, too late. But again, what are your guys' thoughts and feelings about a card like this being introduced into any other card game? Would it actually help out your card game that you're playing? Would it harm it? What are your thoughts on Solitaire? Is it worth having a card like this in other card games? Would it help out players of Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Final Fantasy or any other card game that you play? Alright, well, without further ado, that's all I had for you. If you like the video, go ahead and like, subscribe. If you don't, well, whatever. And if you have any other things to say, go ahead and leave it in the comment section below. Thank you.